Hey everyone, Nick Engvall here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about some of the people that make the sneaker history community and this podcast possible. It's more important than ever to think about who you give your money to when you're buying clothing to go with your kicks. Our friends at Guilty Goods started their brand with a goal of giving back, especially to the communities that make sneaker culture possible. With every purchase from Guilty Goods, at least 10% of the proceeds are donated to organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the Susan G. Komen Foundation, the Movement for Black Lives, and many more. You can save 30% on your order by using the code HISTORY at guiltygoods.us. Again, that's history at guiltygoods.us for 30% off, and you can feel good about your purchase knowing you're supporting a meaningful cause. Sneakers are all about presentation, and if you're like me, displaying your kicks at home or in the office is just as important as when they're on your feet. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop-side cases to showcase the entire side of the shoe, not just the heel or the toe, the whole shoe. They've also got display cases for trading card collectors and hat collectors. To me, it's the perfect way to display your collection. You can save at least 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY at sneakerthrone.com. That's history at sneakerthrone.com. If you're a Patreon supporter or a member of our Discord community, you already know about Kicks with V hot sauce and his small batch, locally sourced hot sauce. V has been one of the biggest supporters of sneaker history and the podcast since the early days. He's currently the defending champion in our community trivia nights competition. Kicks with V hot sauce has been a huge hit with the community. You can save 10% on your order by using the code SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. That's SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. Now, you're probably here because you like sneakers, and if you join the Discord, you know our community is about so much more than that. Whether it's the marathon-like community calls, trivia night debates, the in-person meetups, or just sharing our favorite experiences, we found that although we have such different backgrounds, we all have some unexpected shared passions. Not only does the entire community look out for each other when it comes to releases, we're like a support group for life in general. You can join the Discord community for free by heading to the show notes of this episode. After you're done listening to this episode, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Now let's get into today's episode. What up, what up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. Hey, before we get into this episode, I wanted to tell you about a couple of our partners. These are some of the folks that help us keep the podcast going, and they've been nice enough to offer some exclusive discounts for our listeners. Now, if you've watched us on YouTube, you all know how we love to display our kicks when we're not rocking them. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop-side cases to showcase your entire shoe, not just the heel, not just the toe, shoe trees, a number of other sneaker-related accessories. You can save 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY. You can find a link to Sneaker Throne in the description, or you can just head to sneakerhistory.com/sneakerthrone and it will send you directly to their site. Again, that's 10% off with the code HISTORY. Our friends at Prospect are the premier streetwear brand and sneaker boutique based in sunny San Diego, California. One of my favorite places. Prospect is not your typical hypebeast haven, though. They carry classic footwear from brands like Asics, New Balance, Puma, Saucony, as well as local and globally known streetwear brands like Belief, Illust, Rottweiler, Stussy, and many others. Not to mention their own Prospect label and the iconic Just a Kid from Dago collection. If you're a listener of the podcast, you can save 10% on all of your orders from Prospect through their website with the code HISTORY10. That's promo code HISTORY10 at prspctsd.com. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter or a member of our Discord community, you already know about Kicks with V hot sauce and his small batch, locally sourced hot sauce. V has been one of the biggest supporters of sneaker history and the podcast since the early days, and his hot sauce has been a huge hit with the community. To celebrate the launch of his new coffee habanero flavor hot sauce and his new habanero honey, my personal favorite, he's given an exclusive discount to our podcast listeners. The first 50 people to use the code SneakerHistory10 will save 10% on their order from kickswithvhots.com. That's SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. If you or someone you know is interested in sponsoring the podcast or becoming a partner with our community, get in touch with us. You can reach us by email at podcast@sneakerhistory.com, and we'll get back to you with information about how we can partner. And now for today's episode.
Jordan trying to shake off Starks. Oh, what a move!
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Final seconds. Bryant for the win.
Iverson against Gill, the crowd on its feet. Allen for the win.
Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast.
What up, what up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. Pretty stoked today because I get to catch up with one of my good friends, Blake Buettner, who actually worked with me at StockX for a number of years, and he is the managing editor of Worn and Wound. So this is going to be a little bit different of a podcast because it's not going to be super focused on sneakers, but there's so much crossover in these two hobbies that we share. And us being friends have talked about this for a long time. I was actually a guest on their podcast. So if you haven't checked that out, go check that out. We'll leave a link in the description for it. But Blake, welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast. How you doing, man?
Nick, excellent. It's always awesome to chat with you. I love it getting your insights on sneakers. You've pulled me into this hobby a little bit. Well, I guess we can talk more about it, but I've had to kind of like hold it at arm's length a little bit because, it's a slippery slope how that goes. But no, it's a pleasure to be here, man. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for making the time to come on, man. And yeah, slippery slope. That's actually, that's literally the kind of the mentality that I have with watches too, because, my brother's a little into watches and I've got a couple of uncles that are into watches. And like, I just feel like it's not even a slope, man. It's just literally a cliff. Like I'm just diving in, like I'm, vacationing in Hawaii and straight in. So yeah. I'm trying not to do that, but I think there's just, we've talked about it at length many times, and there's just so much crossover between sneakers and watches and just the, and for us specifically cars like that, just kind of these worlds that overlap so much, but yet we're so secluded in so many ways that, I figured that like talking to you would give some of the people that listen to this podcast a little bit more insight and kind of understanding if they do have an interest in getting involved or, if people are already involved, they'll be just happy to hear from you on this side of the world anyway. So, yeah. I guess like first give, maybe a short background on who you are and then, what Worn and Wound is, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the managing editor, as you mentioned, here at Worn and Wound. I've been in and around and covering the watch world and industry for maybe about 12 years now. I was with Hodinkee very early on, and I was a member of that team for about 5 or 6 years. And then made the move to Detroit for StockX, where I met you, which was great, which was just a really incredible experience, as you know, and kind of pulled me into that whole different world. So I helped build the luxury vertical out there, with some excellent team members, obviously. So I was there for about 3 years, and then made the move, out here to New York, which has been fantastic, to work with Worn and Wound. I've known these guys for a long time. I'm sure it's the same in the sneaker world. Like once you get to a certain level, it's a pretty small world, right? Like, so, it's all the same. It's familiar faces that you get to see. So I've known these guys at Worn and Wound for a long time. And I like their approach. They take a very, I know this is like an overused word, but like authentic approach to the hobby. And what I mean by that is, they're not focused on like, the superficial parts of the hobby, right? They take a very like realistic, like almost, approachable, like route to this hobby. It's not supposed to be like just a rich white guy thing and like you're showing off wealth, and that's not how we experience the hobby. That's not how we enjoy the hobby. That's not how we write about the hobby. That's why you don't really see like celebrity watch spotting posts on our websites or like whatever the watches are performing at auction, just because that can be cool, but it's not like how we enjoy the hobby, and it doesn't like heighten it. Like people with money having this stuff doesn't heighten our enjoyment of the hobby. And I'm sure you experience the same thing there, but that's kind of what makes this Worn and Wound a little bit different. And I think puts us in like a pretty unique position now, especially these days, because the hobby, like sneakers, it's changed a lot as it's grown, and I think there's a lot of like hype, FOMO culture that's kind of entered into it. So it's gotten a lot of people into the hobby that way, but if you want to like stick around, I think there's a lot more underneath that you really have to understand and appreciate,
Definitely. That's so spot on to how sneakers work, and sneaker history specifically. The unattainable stuff is interesting occasionally, right? But we can't focus on that stuff. Otherwise you just end up being, bummed out about the entire hobby. And I think that's something that we've tried to kind of balance. It's like we want to talk about the whole picture, right? And those things, specifically like high-end auctions that are going on now where sneakers, unless you were really, really passionate about game worn and game used stuff back in the day, you never really cared about the kind of stuff that's now an ongoing conversation within the hobby. And specifically, like the hype culture and the FOMO and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. We have a community of, 150 or so people. And, it's nice if somebody gets something like that and, they want it and people look out for each other within the community. But it's definitely not something that drives most of the conversation or most of the enjoyable conversation for us in the community, because it's not something that most of us will ever be able to relate to. I love seeing that stuff. I love seeing, some of the craziness and the just, unattainable stuff as like this, it's kind of like the car world. It's like, of course I want to go see a Gunther Works or a Singer or something. But the reality is like my budget is going to keep me in like the, 924s or the 944 Porsches, it's going to be like a very basic entry level Porsche for me. So it's cool to hear you say that. And I think that'll be a good kind of starting point for our conversation. But you guys do, the what's on your wrist today. We do something called Rockin' and Coppin'. So what is something that you've been wearing lately, or maybe your latest pickup on the sneaker side of things?
Yeah. So I actually, right now I'm wearing Asics Gel Light 3s. This is the Ronnie Feig ones. I forget the name. It was like the colorways where he did all the kind of like kind of grayish, purplish, right? Colorways. So I'm a huge Gel Light 3 fan. They're very comfortable. They seem to like go with everything, or at least I'm not the fanciest guy in the world, as you can see, and they go with my style like pretty well. And then on my wrist is a Rolex Explorer, reference 124-270. This is the new Explorer 1 in the 36 millimeter case. We're doing some content around it, so I've been wearing it around. I don't always like just wear Rolexes around or that kind of thing. It's, I don't want to give you the wrong impression or anything. But this is just a watch that we've got in for like review and that we're doing some content around. Nice. But as far as Rolexes go, it's a good one to have. I mean, the MSRP is like $6,500, very expensive, but it's kind of like on the entry level, there. And I've got my Milwaukee hat on and my spotted cow here. You may have heard of the Milwaukee Bucks that just won the national. So I'm still kind of geeking out. I'm from Madison, as you know, Wisconsin. Yep. So I'm still in that headspace out here.
Nice, man. Congrats. It's such a, it's such an incredible feeling as a sports fan when your team actually wins, man. Being a Giants fan, I'm wearing a Giants affiliate team from back in the day, but like not wearing a Giants hat today, but I've probably told this before on the podcast, but like my grandparents went to at least one game a year in San Francisco from 1958 when the team came to town up until about 2008 or 9 when they just couldn't physically get there and go. And, the Giants ended up winning in 2010 and 12 and 14, had like a crazy run. And 2010, first time I saw my grandpa cry, like that, that is sports for me, right? It's just, it's so much more. And it was so cool to see, nothing against the Suns and those guys. There's definitely a lot of people, my uncle lives in Phoenix, has been a Suns fan since he moved down there decades ago. But, it's cool to see that. And I think we just had a guest on, to talk about her book about Giannis and, his journey. And it's just fascinating how, those types of stories kind of can create like moments within our hobby that like completely annihilate whatever hype and FOMO is, right? Because if you're passionate or you're a fan of that, or if you enjoyed the finals, you might pick up a Giannis shoe that, to remember that moment for yourself. Yeah. And so I was wondering if is there anything like that in the watch world that, has a similar kind of, cultural like moment type of thing that impacts, people's interest in particular brands or watches? I
mean, there is like kind of a culture at large, I suppose. But it's probably less like focused on a certain event. Like I know the basketball culture seems to be like pretty entwined with sneaker culture, which is really cool. Like the watch stuff kind of bridges into like movie culture a little bit, and then like the automotive world as well, which I know that there's been kind of a lot of crossover with like you and me, and I'm sure you know a lot of car guys that are also like big into watches. It's just something. I think there's like a collector gene. There's like a gene that we have, I think, that you just are like prone to getting into this kind of stuff. And if you're the kind of person that's going to take the time to understand like a mechanical watch and appreciate that, then you probably, there's other things about the automotive world and the mechanics of that you're like really going to appreciate as well. Which yeah. And you spot these people, right? Like a guy has a new, 992 turbo, and it's like, great, that's really cool, and you've got the money to buy it. You don't know if he's like a car guy, but if you see like a 928 rolling around in great condition, that person's probably a car guy, and you're gonna want to go and like make the time to talk to him. So I mean, in the watch world, it's the same. If you saw me wearing this, you'd probably like pass me right by. I'd be like, oh, it's just some nerd with a Rolex doing some money, but a lot of the watches that we have and wear about and talk about, like if you see them, and they might not be $10,000 watches, they might be $500 watches or whatever, but they're not just a watch that you go pick up for, to pick up a watch. Like if you have it, and that person is probably into it on another level, and enjoys it like on another level. And to me, like there's a lot of fun in this hobby to be had in that price range, right? Like it takes it out of this realm of like the precious. Right. Yeah. And it puts it in this like, hey, you're using this every single day and you can enjoy it every single day. And more importantly, you're creating memories in it every single day. And I don't know if you think about shoes this way or not, but I used to be in the vintage watches a lot more. And recently I've kind of gotten into like more modern stuff that maybe doesn't have the character as like some of the vintage stuff, but I find myself like, I don't have to be precious with it. So I wear it more often. So whenever like I go through something like the Bucks won the finals, right? And I'm like on the couch because it's super here in the East Coast. It's like super late by the time the game ends. And, when I see, they're going to win, I go and like, I wake up my son and it's like midnight and he's groggy and we watch the end of the game together, like on my phone streaming, and I happen to be wearing, some old Seiko or whatever that I had on. Like that's a memory that I have in that watch now, right? Yeah. And you don't think about those things. You don't plan on those things happening, but they just happen. So I don't know. I like that. I like using this stuff, and I don't like treating it as, this is like a precious thing that has to go in the lockbox, and I have to like track it like an investment and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's the same thing for me with sneakers. All the memories that I have of, meeting people or, going to events and not even sneaker related events necessarily. I mean, there are some of those where it's like, hey, I remember I met, my friend Dalton, who's in our sneaker history community and helps with the community. And I was wearing LeBron 7s when I met him because I was in Cleveland for a sneaker con event, or Columbus, Ohio for a sneaker con event. But like for me, I mean, like I remember going to the races with my brother in, the late 90s, early 2000s when American Le Mans was like kind of just starting out and, wearing a pair of Jordan True Blue 3s and like getting them all muddy and beating them up from that event. And like, yes, of course, it's like you don't want to see it totally destroyed. But at the same time, like that's going to live in my mind way longer than most of the shoes that I own because I have that story, that personal story with it. So I think that's a beautiful thing about like hobbies and kind of that like it's almost, I wonder if, and maybe I'll pose this question to you. I wonder if that for, let's say the average consumer, if that kind of mentality and thought process comes from almost like a pushback to the hype culture and the FOMO that we've been dealing with, for the past, 5 years or 10 years or whatever it's been, because it didn't seem like that was always a thing. It seemed like a rare instance that you would find people that had that same mentality a decade ago, in my opinion, at least in the sneaker world.
Yeah. Right. This is like the paradox because there's every week seemingly like something that you got to have. And it's It's, it's tempting, and you're always thinking about like, oh man, I can't wait for this drop, or I can't wait for that to come out. I can't wait to see what they do next year. But at the same time, these products are being pitched to us. Well, I mean, at least on the watch side, it's like something that you buy and just wear for the rest of your life, right? Like it seems like an odd thing to like, to think about, but I feel like the sneaker culture, like it really touched a nerve, and that like really exploded in that, and it's really fun to see how that's evolved. But it's come into like the watch world now, where watch brands are like on these more frequent like release schedules and updating with different dial colors, and it's almost like they're trying to keep up, which seems ridiculous, right? Because the sneakers, some of them kind of fall in the realm of like impulse purchase type buys, where some of these watch brands are they're selling $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000+ watches, right? Like, you're not going to be like paying attention for like whatever the next big one is like the next week. Like, it's something that you maybe save up for, and it's like a big purchase, and then you're asked to like, hey, this is something that I'm going to experience and have for the rest of my life. Being collectors, we operate a little differently though, right? Like, I see behind you, you've got more than a couple pairs of shoes, right? I've got watch boxes over here filled with all kinds of watches, but that's just like, that's our livelihood, and that's how we enjoy the hobby. So yeah, it's tough. It's, you want to feel like these are things that you can buy and hold on to and create the experiences with. And then how do you balance that out with, well, I can't just buy every new thing that comes out like every week. So it's tough. Like, I haven't like figured out like the good balance of that. It's not like I'm buying watches every week or anything like that. And I'm sure you aren't buying sneakers every week. But I guess like, it's just like they seem to be finding like any holes in the, we're growing our market share, and we got to make a watch, or we got to make a shoe that's for everybody. And so we don't have a watch for this type of person, so we got to make a watch that's this, or we don't have a shoe that's like this style, so we got to make that style. So it seems like it's like plugging up all the holes. And I used this analogy on the podcast the other week, talking about like how more watch brands are doing this, and likening it to like in the old days, BMW, it was like the 3, the 5, the 7. If you go back far enough, like the 8, right? And that was that. Like that was the lineup. Now you've got like a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, and each one of them has like multiple variants within. The 2-door versions have 4-door versions. The 4-door versions have 2-door versions. Like it's there's got to be a car that's like for everybody, right? And I see a lot of brands like kind of take the same approach. But at the end of the day, now like you walk into a BMW dealership and it's kind of like, what's going on here? Like, sure, the 8 Series is beautiful or whatever, but it's just not the same,
Yeah, totally. Do you, I guess, do you see the industry as a whole? One of the things that's, obviously, sneakers, collaborations, and like that limited approach, or maybe just a more focused niche, marketing tactic for a particular region or style or story or whatever. Do you find that in watches, that same kind of mentality of like trying to, I guess, slice up the market in different ways to through collaborations? I mean, we talked a little bit before we started recording, and when you were, when you agreed to come on, I started thinking about like, okay, well, I know Sneaker Freaker magazine has been around for a long time. They've done G-Shocks. G-Shocks is kind of I don't know. It's like, to me, it's just like the standard, hey, we want to have a watch in the store kind of boutique. Obviously Sneaker Freaker is a magazine, but I feel like most sneaker boutiques are, going to try to get a G-Shock at some point, right? Because that's almost like a stamp of approval from someone outside of their world to say, hey, these guys are cool. But then we also see, I think ASICS did a whole shoe release that was, framed around a G-Shock a couple years back. And then Greats brand just did a Timex, Timex a year or two ago. So is that something that is common within watches? And what does that landscape look like for the kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's the more, the boutique side in sneakers, does that exist within the watch?
Yeah, you do see a lot of this, and obviously like the collaboration type thing is becoming like it's everything, like who you collaborate with now, like it can do a lot. And there's even like collector communities that collaborate with brands to develop their own like watches for the community. Even if it's like 50 of them or 20 of them, like they'll do that. Even if it costs 50, 60 grand, that's just like how it is. But I think the boutique scene, like, there definitely is boutique specific models that they'll develop for like Miami, New York, LA. That like the AP boutiques will get a certain dial color or configuration of a watch, and then that's there. But I also see it like on the like sub $500 scale. You see a lot of this kind of stuff too. That is maybe like more regional thinking, or at least like that's how they're telling the story, right? Like Todd Snyder did this thing with Timex, and it's they talk about up in the Hamptons or wherever, and you can get the thing, and it's if that's like the lifestyle thing that you're going for that speaks to you, then that's great. And I just was looking at these 327s that Todd Snyder did, the farmers market, I think they're called. There's like 3 colorways of them. So yeah, it seems to be like breaking into these like small segments of like, hey, we can tell like a little story here. But I think it works a little better like that, right? Like the 327 is what, like $100, $120 or something like that. And then G-Shock or Timexes or that kind of thing that are like a few $100s. It's easier to like buy into that story if it's like kind of in that price range. When you're talking like tens of thousands of dollars, it's like a different thing. But I see a lot more of that type happening, and especially this year. And I don't know if it's something that you've seen in the sneaker world too, but in the watch world, like this year especially, we've seen a lot of like bright color schemes coming in. And I don't know if it's like because 2020 was such a well, it was 2020, right? Like it was rough. Yeah. We were all kind of inside, and it was now coming out of all this and being able to like go outside and interact with people and all this kind of stuff. Have you seen a lot brighter colorways coming out from watch brands, which has been really fun to see. And I think you capture some seasonality there of like the summer watch, but again, like, if you're pitching this as something that you're going to like buy and wear for the next like 10 years of your life, right? The seasonality thing kind of like goes out the window, but they do sell them. And I think more and more people are finding themselves in a position of like, all right, well, I'll maybe have like 3 or 4 watches, and I'll have this watch for like the summer seasons, or this when I go to the Hamptons, or whatever it is, right? So is that a trend that you've seen follow through as well in sneakers?
I mean, I think sneakers always has the bright colors, right? Part of it is just that, and I would say the difference, I guess, is that with sneakers, it's always been more about standing out, right? Even if you go back to like, Michael Jordan or even earlier athletes, having potentially their own colorway that matched the jerseys or whatever of the team that they're on, right? That stuff was intentionally done to break from the norm of, hey, a solid white shoe with one accent color, right? So I think that it always exists. I have seen a lot more. I think there's a lot more, I guess, positivity, trying to be pushed into the stories, and rightfully so, right? Like you said, 2020 was, it was rough for everybody, right? And I think, for me, sneakers, cars, any hobby that I've been a part of, that's kind of your escape, I guess, from the real world in a sense, right? Like that kind of, mentality or positioning for the stories is ultimately going to lead to brighter colors and, I think more interesting stories too, because people are like, the Hamptons might be a little uppity for this reference, but like that is, an aspirational, hey, let's get out of here and go enjoy ourselves. And, I think we're also all kind of looking at like, how do we escape so much of this, right? It's been such a rough, year and a half of not being able to go out and do things freely, but also still, a majority of the country still, backed in next door to their neighbor. And, every time you see other human beings, you're thinking, okay, is this safe? And so like, I think that it exists. I think that there's kind of levels to it with sneakers just because it's been going on maybe longer than the watch world. But I also think that like, that's how we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. I can only imagine that like, just because I just saw something on Twitter about it, but like, concerts, right? Like I haven't been to a concert, since 2019. Like I'm a big like music person, so I would go to concerts regularly. I'm not a big festival person, but like I could see how we're going to have a massive boom whenever it is. I mean, we already saw Lollapalooza in Chicago was, 100 and something thousand people every day, and I'm not ready to be in that position, but like at some point we'll eventually all get back to a point of like, okay, let's go do these things that we would love to do. And I could see how, both footwear, watch, all sorts of people are going to be like, hey, let's get involved in that, because that's where all the energy is at for this next, whatever, 2 to 3 years of, kind of recreating normal again, if that's the way to say it. I don't know. But
yeah.
Do you find that, I guess like the community, the watch community, like enjoys that kind of like smaller, or collaborative effort the way the sneaker world does? Or is it, still kind of new?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I think there's a lot of people that are still kind of like, that don't really know what to make of it, especially in terms of like, again, like if this is something that you want to have for the rest of your life, maybe the best way to think of it is, like back when like Rolls-Royce was like a custom coach builder, right? And then they were like making, one-off requests for their customers, and you're getting something that's kind of like bespoke to your taste. Like it's kind of a similar vein to that, especially like up on the high end, like I was mentioning, those communities that will, design watches for the members of their communities that's like totally bespoke for them. Or like auction, the only watch where they make like a single example of a watch to put up for auction. But I mean, there's still like this whole idea of like the exclusivity thing also kind of works at odds with, like, hey, this is a growing community, then you want this stuff to be available to everyone. And, and it's, there shouldn't be a price barrier to entry if you want to enjoy this hobby, right? Like there should be something there for all of us. I think some of the creations that come out of it though are really awesome. And, there's one brand that's like on the really high end MB&F. It's this guy, Max Busser, and then the F is just friends. So everything he does is like a collaborative effort with like all the people that he knows elsewhere in the industry. And while very few people can buy one of those, I think it kind of like heightens your really appreciation and like passion for what's going on. But it's still like OEM type stuff. It's not like taking something that exists and like modding it. It's making it like in your own vision, right? Which is kind of a cool thing, which is different from like, I just saw what's the Lamar Ball, the Rookie of the Year guy. They did this watch with
LaMelo Ball.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's right. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but like it has to be deeper than just like throwing like your name on the dial or something. Like there's a lot of stories there that are really interesting, and I think there's a lot of really incredible talent in this industry, and I think the more that you can kind of like pool that together to do awesome things, like of course you want to support that, and people like to see that, but at the same time we also want like cool shit that we can buy, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah. So that kind of makes me think like, talking about like kind of the more, like the, let's say the groups they're going and having the bespoke stuff made, that happens obviously in sneakers too. It's pretty interesting to kind of watch how that's evolved, because we've also seen, in the last, I'd say 18 months, the artists that recreate a Jordan 1 with their own logo on the side instead of a swoosh, right? Or a dunk or whatever. And they basically are that same thing as what you're referring to in the watch world, right? They're like, hey, we've, like I'm going to sell to my fan base. I've created enough energy around myself and what I do to be able to produce these things. Now, in the last couple of months, we've had Nike, one patent that, actually have a patent on the Jordan 1 for the first time, in
interesting
decades or whatever.
Yeah.
But now they're even suing some of these people that are customizers, artists, whatever. We're kind of at that point where like there's so much money in it that I think Nike has to protect their brand. That to me, that sucks because now you're going after the artists and the little communities that have created the pockets in this world that, those types of things are not necessarily for me, but I do think that they bring interest into the hobby. And I always think that that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Do you, I guess, like, do you see that, the name that comes to mind is Bamford, because I know they've done, collaborations with a bunch of the streetwear brands that I admire. So how does the watch community view that kind of gray area? Is, I guess, might be a too tough of a term for it, because sometimes it's not gray, but it really is kind of a divisive area in most hobbies.
Yeah, it really is. And Bamford, I think, is an interesting example because, it's certainly not for everybody, but LVMH snatched him up so now he does the in-house customizations for like Zenith and Tag Heuer. Like, there's a handful of their brands that right on their e-com sites you can, just like a Nike ID type thing, you can I want this color dial, this color hands, this color hour markers, and really go to town on it if you want. I don't know how the brands to be honest, this kind of surprised me, because you could create a version of the watch potentially, which is kind of ugly, if we're being honest, and it's still got that brand name on it. And I'm sure that Nike does, you could make an ugly Air Max 1 or whatever in the Nike ID, and it still says Nike on it, and they still have to make it and ship it out to you. But maybe they don't want people saying oh, Nike makes that kind of stuff. And it's it's out there. And yeah, the Bamford stuff, it's not exactly for me either, but some people really like to have that level of customization, and especially in some of their high-end watches. And more power to them if that's how they enjoy the hobby. I'm not here to judge them. But there are some trouble. There's this brand, Artisans de Genève. They'll take Rolexes. If you buy a Rolex, you can send it into them and commission some customization type thing. So they mod Rolexes basically. I can imagine this doesn't Rolex is notoriously protective of their product and their IP, and they've been around a minute, and so they've got something going on. And I think their whole goal is not how can we increase our quarter over quarter revenue. Their whole goal is how can we make sure that our brand is still as powerful as it is today in 50 years, in 100 years. And that's their driving force, right? And I think that's where you come into issues when you're thinking of oh man, what are you allowing people to do with it? But I agree. I would never go after the artist community or the people doing this or the creators. But it's definitely a scene that exists, and you can enjoy it on a much smaller level too. The Seiko modding scene is crazy, and it has been for a long time. We just had this pop up out in Manhattan, where we had people come in. We had a collector meetup, and a guy brought this whole briefcase full of Seikos that he had modded, and they were all unique and different, and he was so proud of them. It was awesome to see his enthusiasm for that. So he's taking these watches that are $350, $400, $500, and modding every part of it to make it his own, which is, it's pretty cool to see, right? And that's how that's his passion. That's how he enjoys the hobby, and more power to him, right? I think that seeing that kind of a thing gets a lot of other people, as you mentioned, into the hobby as well. They're saying, oh, I could do that. I could make it my own. There's something powerful to that, I think,
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, it's interesting because, there is no right or wrong with it, right? I think that, people being creative is always a good thing. But at the same time, we're in this interesting spot where, what's the difference between, not to pick on anybody, but what's the difference between, anybody on Instagram customizing a Jordan 1 and Virgil Abloh customizing and making his own Jordan 1, right? In a sense, Nike and all the brands that are doing these collaborations and bringing in these artists and designers, they've created this demand on the business side of it. They've created the demand by bringing in the partners. Now people are like, hey, I've got all these shoes, or I have access to, going to go buy these shoes from a Nike outlet and do this to 10 pairs. And next thing you know, it's 100 pairs. Next thing you know, it's 500 pairs. And next thing you know, it's like Nike's telling you not to do it. So it's a really kind of interesting time for it, I guess, and, to me, I guess like, I just like being an observer of it all. Right. Yeah. Like that's what I love about the hobby is like the intricacies of it. And, I'm sure that it exists like this in watches, but like, I'm a big Allen Iverson fan. I've collected, a lot of Allen Iverson shoes over the years, but like there are people that have much deeper and more nuanced Iverson collections than I have. I worked for Soul Collector for years. So I have a massive collection of Soul Collector shoes when we were doing collaborations. That was kind of, I would say, kind of where you guys are at, right? Like, Worn and Wound is kind of like the Soul Collector or what the Soul Collector used to be of the sneaker community, right? Where it's like, hey, these are just people that really appreciate the normal aspect of what this is. It's not super high. It's not super low. It's just like everybody's kind of accepted. We're all kind of weird for being this crazy about this particular product, but that's what makes it cool, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what's weird about it, though, and that's what I like. And that's the difference. Again, like the guy, it's easy to just walk into a dealer with a handful of money and just buy like whatever's hot, right? But it takes like time to like curate like your own taste and put together like your own, like you're bringing something of value to the community if you like have such a focus on like one thing, right? And especially with something like Allen Iverson, right? Like those shoes, maybe like a lot of people coming into the hobby right now are not familiar at all with, but there's a whole lot of scholarship now thanks to collectors like that are putting a spotlight on it and like saying, hey, look at this whole catalog of stuff that you didn't know about. That's awesome, right? And I know like the whole vintage, like heritage reissue thing has become like really big in the watch world. And, I don't know if you see the same kind of trends in the sneaker world, but I always enjoy seeing like when you post, the pictures of like Sean Kemp or Larry Johnson or Harold Miner or Charles Barkley or whatever, and like whatever shoes they're wearing in your sneaker history account. I'm always like, wow, I don't even remember. Like I remember watching that stuff as a kid and having all those guys' cards and that kind of stuff, but the sneaker stuff didn't even cross my mind. Like where are all the reissues of those kind of things now, right? Like that seems like ripe territory in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's an interesting, kind of part to it too, is like, there's this, and maybe it would actually work better in watches in a sense, but like, there's this massive audience of people that have those memories that you can kind of tap into and say, hey, remember this. And then it's like, if you remember that and really like it, buy this pair of shoes, like that's a legitimate reason why I've bought tons of shoes, right? It's like, oh my God, I forgot that, Tony Hawk wore these or, like you said, Harold Miner wore these. Like that's, and being in it for so long now, like it's rare that I am like, I have like one of those moments that triggers a memory that I didn't remember because I've studied it for so long. Yeah. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, I would love to have, all these shoes that I have. Right. But I love sharing the stories more than I love the actual physical shoe, right? I have to be able to share that experience with somebody in order for it to really be important, and sometimes that's just me and my brothers, or sometimes it's just me and the sneaker history community. Sometimes it's, you and like people in the car world and completely different worlds. And, it's always like it's always for me, like the conversation starter is what I'm always looking for. Right. And sometimes, to your point about, the watch you're wearing today and saying like, hey, the average person might not care, but like when you have that watch that's nuanced enough, you're going to get into a conversation that is just so kind of, puts you in the zone and gets you in that mood of like, this is why I love this stuff, because, somebody noticed enough and knows enough about it and cares enough about it to be able to have those conversations. But it kind of makes me wonder too, like, is that whole like kind of retro like vibe a thing in the watch world the way it is? I know sneakers has become like almost too dependent on it, in my opinion. But how does that look in the watch world for people that are, not as well versed in the watches? I
would say it's the watch part is a lot of brands are becoming too reliant on their back catalog as well. It's easy to look back and say, oh man, this watch is like really on trend right now that we made in 1968 and 1969, like let's bring it back in modern size, put a modern movement in it, and put a few new colorways on it and stuff like that. A lot of brands are like really relying on that kind of stuff right now, and they've done really well for them. And some of them are really cool, right? Because it's on trend. Like it's just, it is what it is. But at this point now, it's like, where's, I want to see like the originality. I want to see something. How are we pushing forward? Like what's coming next? And we can't always be kind of looking at, well, what's the next trend that's going to come up? And how can we be in front of that? But like, hey, what do you want to make? And like, what does that look like? And make it. And that's where I think there's a lot of like young brands right now that we really pay attention to that are making their own thing. And it's wholly original, and you love seeing it. The inspirations like are there, but it's not like it's borrowing the heritage of somebody else. It's creating something entirely new, right? And I think that's really important for the future of these hobbies, that somebody does that. Like, we cannot just keep in this, it's like the cyclical nature of it. And I love some of these reissues, like, as much as the next guy, and they're really good looking and that kind of stuff. But for like the longevity, I don't know, it's hard to like really get behind some of that stuff, because you wanna like reward brands when they're doing something original. But I guess it's also a risk, right? Like Audemars Piguet, really high-end brand. They're really known for the royal oak, right? And that's a shape that's been around for a long time, and they've become like, almost like chained to it, right? Because it's so successful. And a few years back, they tried to do a new model, the Code 1159, which is just like a totally new, unique thing, and they got kind of raked for it. Was it the best looking watch in the world? That's all subjective, but I like that they did something different and new, and I like it when brands do that, and I think they should be rewarded. But it's a scary area to get into. It's like, well, we know this works, and this might not work, and people might hate it because people hate change, and the internet's going to internet, and it's just going to be ugly for a while. But it's something that you almost like you have to do and just like commit yourself to, and just like stick to it and like evolve it over the years. And I don't know. I don't think many designs are just like snap, like it's super popular. Maybe the Jordan 1 or something like that, right? But yeah. And then there's a few watches that I'm sure were, but a lot of it, like, it just takes time, and like it kind of goes in and out of taste, but like it's its own thing, and it's staying in its own lane. And I like to see that in the watch world. I want to see more of it in the watch world, and I don't want brands to be so reliant on what they did 50 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same way about sneakers. I do like seeing the retro product, if it's done well, and it's tough because a lot of times, the approach now is, well, we've got to make, I don't know, let's say 100,000 of these shoes, which means not only are you going to make the original color, but you're going to make 8 other colors that nobody really cares about. And it's like, we put a South Beach color on the Jordan 1 because, we had to make all these Jordan 1s to, make the mold. The Jordan 1's a bad example, but like to be able to, justify the money that it costs to make the mold to make that new retro product. Right.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a really kind of catch-22 for the brands, because they're not in the business of making small quantities. And that is what ultimately hurts them when it comes to, I think, the kind of nostalgia aspect of sneakers. Yeah.
But do they rely on that though? With something like a Jordan 7 or something, like, do they need like the infrared 6s the 6, right? The infrared 6s, yeah. And then they did the Travis Scott one. Like, do they rely on those kind of like flagship blockbuster releases to like, okay, then off the back of this, we're going to release like 10 other colorways because like everyone's hot on the 6 now, right?
Yep, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And they do the same thing, right? It's like, if you were to release a Travis Scott Jordan 1 that's just a traditional Jordan 1 or a traditional Jordan 6, I would argue that you're probably going to sell more of that without the kind of new twist that he adds to it. Sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's well done, but like we see a lot of attempts at that aren't successful from a lot of collaborators too. But one thing that I kind of wonder about, because it's always been kind of I guess like a very nuanced group of people within the sneaker world. How does the kind of the restoration aspect of watches fit into that, that that brand approach with, old catalog product or retro, product, I guess in the sneaker world is what we would call it. But how does that play into the bigger picture? And because I as somebody who's not big into watches, that would be my approach, just because I look at watches the way I look at cars. It's much different than sneakers to me. It's like, oh, this is something that has this like incredible story or I guess like generational value that I want to be able to kind of keep that and bring that and pass it along to the next generation or tell that story to the next generation. So how does that work in the watch world? This
is everything. I would like. I can't stress the importance of thinking like this when you're just coming into a hobby. And I know it's easy to like get seduced by whatever like sexy new thing is out there, but like you really should be thinking about this from the long term. And even like small brands now are starting to think like this too, in terms of like, all right, we're going to make a run of like 300 of these, but we're going to make a run of, 900 of like these little parts that are sensitive to wear, so that this person's kid or whatever will have like there'll be parts there. Otherwise, a watchmaker has to like literally make a new part by hand. But yeah, I mean, this is a big thing right now. And I think that if you're buying something with the expectation to keep it and pass it on, then you should be able to rely on the brand itself to provide support for you to do that, right? Because that's kind of how they're marketing it to you, right? The Patek, you never really own a Patek. You merely look after it for the next generation, which is super hoity-toity. But I mean, I think there's something there. Like this is something that, and if you really think about these products, it's like cost per wear. Like over the course of like years. I don't know if you think about it with sneakers, but like, hey, if I'm going to buy these sneakers for $1,000 and I'm going to have them for 10 years and I'm going to wear them, a few hundred times or whatever, and you break the cost out over that span, it's like, oh, okay, it's not so bad. Like with a watch, it's like, I'm going to spend 10 grand on this and I'm going to have it for 50 years. I'm going to wear it every day for like 15 of those. And, I think that's a different thing, right? And people should be aware that this stuff breaks down, just like sneakers, but it's something that, you should be mindful of that. And just like a car, like if you take care of it, it's going to last a really long time. And there's great like servicers and watchmakers that, like I said, if they need to, they can make custom parts for it. But I mean, I had a watch from a small brand that I got a long time ago, and I just sent it in because I was having some issues, and he's like, I can't fix it because they don't make this part for it anymore. And it was like this part that was specially made for the watch, and like, that's that. And, that sucks. It's a terrible position to be in. But, like, I think if you're just coming into this hobby, like, you should be thinking of it in terms of like the longevity. And I think that helps you put your collection into context, and it helps you think of it in terms of like things that you want to keep, instead of, all right, I'm going to get this and then I'm hunting for that. And it's like always on to the next thing, instead of like, this just really kind of forces you to focus in and think like, I want to keep this for a long time, and it matters to me to keep it in this kind of a condition. And I'm sure it's even more important with sneakers, which are probably more susceptible to wear and tear than a watch is, right? I mean, do you guys think of it
definitely.
like it's like in like a lifetime term? I saw this story on Instagram or something. This guy was taking old shoes, like original J1s, and like replacing some of the parts with like the sole from like fake ones, but just so that you could wear them, continue wearing them.
Yeah.
And I thought like, well, the fake is one thing, but I really like that he's doing that, right? Because he's breathing new life into these.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting thing about sneakers now, right? There's so many, knockoff companies making this stuff that it's, easily accessible, where, and you could get into the debates as to whether like, I'm sure it happens in the watch world, right? You said that part is not available for the watch you sent in. If you went and had somebody make it, does that take away from the authenticity of the watch? Like that could be debated, forever, right? It's just like, for me, it's just like cars, right? It's like, okay, well, if you replaced it with a non-OEM part, is it really a real whatever, right? And it's like, well, yeah, to a certain level, certain things you're going to want to be 100%, OEM if you're trying to keep it that way. If you're trying to just drive the car, you might just want it to run and function, right? So I think with sneakers, we see a lot of people kind of doing that. I guess the good thing about sneakers is there's just massive amounts of swappable, interchangeable parts, right? A Jordan 3, for instance, you might not have the you don't have to, if you have a black cement pair, you don't have to have a black cement pair to replace the outsole, midsole, right? You can pull that off of any number of Jordans, have it, painted or, whatever, to kind of give you that experience again, that you got from the Jordan 3s from 20 years ago or whatever it was when you got that pair. But I do think that I think it's an interesting idea to think about, the manufacturers even providing some of this stuff, right? Because at some point in the sneaker world, I think it has to happen. And, there's not a lot of talk about this because I don't think most of sneakers is ready for it. But I do think that there will be a time when you can buy maybe just very nuanced things. But I do think that some of the brands will try that kind of thing to help the community keep the stories going, right? Because that's the challenge. And that's why in a lot of ways we're in this weird spot in sneakers where the Jordan 1 is like kind of the only thing that, and the Dunks, right? Like that everybody knows. But if the kind of customizers and restorers were empowered to bring a story back for some obscure shoe from, Larry Johnson or something like that, you might see interest in that shoe because it's so unique at some point, and I think it's just an ebb and flow. We'll eventually see, Dunks and Jordan 1s kind of go back to this. Hey, they're great shoes, but they're always there. So, and I see them everywhere. So I'm going to wear something different and something more unique or more special to me personally than just this one that was, just released last week that I had to throw on first thing. Yeah,
boy, I really wish more brands would really take that seriously and think about their products in terms of that type of longevity, especially with shoes. I mean, that would make a big difference. And I would spend a lot more on a pair of shoes if I knew that I could get support for that shoe for the next 20 years. And if the sole wore down 8 times, whatever, I can get them back. And I know that they make the components to make it basically a brand new pair of shoes. I really love that concept. And I think, watch brands are starting to think of this if you bought a watch in the late 90s with this bracelet and you still got to make the parts for that. If a guy buys it and loses a bunch of weight or gains a bunch of weight or whatever in 15 years and he needs a new link for that bracelet. And it's a lot of these small things that you don't really think about, but you should be thinking about, especially when in these hobbies where, these are things that mean something to us. We're creating the stories in them, at the end of the day, and we want to keep them around, and we should keep them around. And it feels more efficient and more responsible, frankly, if we think of it, these products that way, instead of every couple of years, I'll just get a new pair or a new watch and throw this one away. That's not okay. But there's the value of it too. It's a whole other part. And when you talk about replacing with non-OEM parts, I'm sure you've seen what the used car market is doing right now and some of the crazy prices that you're seeing on some cars go on if you follow Bring a Trailer or anything like that. But I'm always been surprised by what I see there. And the provenance and the originality of it is everything. That one owner Mark IV Supra that sold the other week for $200,000 or something like that, because it was dead stock, if that had the full rundown of mods or whatever, it's, cuts the price and maybe a quarter of that or something. And with watches, these are things that do go to auction and people do argue over, is that a redial? Is that a dial from a different watch that was brought over to this? Because, your Jordan 3 example, that part could be swappable, if you've got a destroyed part on a super valuable watch, that you can just swap in with that, and then it becomes something else. This is really risky territory in the auction world right now, because these are watches that are starting to sell at auction for $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. This is really valuable stuff. And with the sneakers, is there an auction scene like that, or how seriously is that taken? If you're going to look at the resale market, hey, is this all original? How many times has it been worn? And all that kind of what's the provenance? Is that something that's thought about?
We don't have, I guess an industry standard. One of the guys that is a part of our community, he goes by the Sneaker Savant on Instagram and Twitter and all that. He has a grading system, almost baseball card, kind of style, 10 out of 10 being, perfect or whatever. And I think that, I don't think he's done restoration type stuff, in terms of grading that stuff. But I think that as the interest for the hobby as a whole grows, the people that have been a part of it for so long are eventually going to be like, hey, I only wear, this handful of rotation, whatever, maybe it's a 2 week or a 3 week, or, who knows, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. But they're eventually going to get to that point where, look, I'm only going to keep certain things because they're very nostalgic. And that's when you end up wanting to have something that might look, might at least aesthetically be restored to a point where you want to see it in the display case behind you, kind of thing, as opposed to, a Jordan 3, for instance. Luckily I've owned most of those shoes throughout the years, with the exception of the originals. And the story is always that the originals were the best quality. And respectfully, I just disagree with that. Not on every shoe, but there are plenty of shoes out there where the original shoe was not as great as we've nostalgically kind of built it up in our minds and the emotion behind it. And I get it. I'm terrible about buying. I still buy old shoes because that's what I really love, the nuance and the stories, and trying to find those interesting, hey, nobody's going to see this again because, a shoe that came out in the 90s that nobody cares about is never going to be re-released. It's never going to be interesting to somebody unless it becomes a story through the community. Right. And then maybe it bubbles up throughout the years and you have something that's interesting. But if the brands are trying to force the story on people, not force, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, because they do a great job of storytelling in a lot of ways. But, going back to how we started, authenticity from a brand should always come with an asterisk. You should always question if that's the real story of the shoe, of the product, in my opinion. When it is, it's great, right? You see it with, the success of certain models or, certain colorways. But when it's not, it's I don't know, is it really as important as we were told it is, right? Are we just, kind of falling into that FOMO trap that has become the default marketing, tactic for so many companies right now? And, that's a whole, philosophical conversation for another time. But I think that, with sneakers, we'll eventually find some place, some form of grading or some form of collectible, kind of collectible world. We're seeing it with Sotheby's and some of these other auction sites that are, but these shoes are, incredibly unique, right? This is a pair that Michael Jordan wore in the, making of Space Jam, right? That doesn't compare to a pair of Space Jam Jordan 11s that I own or that I wore or something. It's not the same. So, but I do think that, the more people come into the hobby, in my opinion, the better it is. You deal with a lot of ups and downs with that, right? There's a lot of negativity that people see coming into it, but at the same time, the attention brings more opportunity for guys like you and I, people that are super passionate about it, to go out there and, talk about it, be involved in it, and find ways to earn a living. So that's the kind of stuff I still, I still think at the end of the day, even if it's not, the whatever it is that brings the attention might not be the best thing at the time, it still benefits everyone who's a fan and a hobbyist, because, you're going to meet new people, you're going to get more experiences, and you're going to get more opportunities to be a part of it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I guess the last thing I want to ask you before we wrap up, what's what would be the advice to somebody, coming from sneakers who, maybe they don't have a watch, or got that first watch handed down from, parents or whatever, or maybe they've been in the G-Shock world for, the last couple of decades. Where do they start, and what are some of the things they look for in kind of getting into watches as a hobby?
Yeah. So this is a big world out there. There's a lot of brands. There's a lot of new brands coming up all the time. So I think just hopping in, you got to know that your tastes are going to change, and you're probably going to make a few mistakes. And it happens with every hobby, right? Like you just get into it because you saw something that you liked, and then you realize like, oh, this is just the tip of the iceberg, or your tastes take a left or whatever. Like that's okay. And it's okay to make some of those mistakes, and that's how you're going to learn. That's how you're going to get experiences. And I think the most important thing is to just like create those experiences. Like buy watches, have experiences in them. It's not like you have to spend a ton of money to do this, and just like get a sense of what you like and what you respond to. And one thing that I think people should really think about is like what's comfortable on their wrist, right? Like at the end of the day, like this is something that you should want to wear that feels good on your wrist. So I know that there's a lot of like big watches out there that look really cool and all that kind of stuff, but trust me, they're not fun to wear like all day in, day out. Like don't discount smaller watches. They're really comfortable, and you can find them at really great prices from a lot of brands, and in original form too. Brands like Serica, Serica, brands like Autodromo, brands like Ferrer, they're doing really awesome original stuff that all is $1,000 or so or under, that you could walk into a room full of watch snobs and they'd all tip their cap to you. Like we had this event out in Manhattan that I was telling you about. We had collectors come in with 6-figure plus watches, and people come in with, $500 watches. Like if you're passionate about it, you're passionate about it, and you bring something to the table, and that's great. Like we'll welcome you with open arms. This is like, just jump in and don't be afraid to make mistakes, I guess. And of course, read Worn and Wound.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Definitely want to give you the opportunity to let people know how to find you, obviously personally or with Worn and Wound too. Yeah, I appreciate it, Nick. It's always a pleasure. So I am Blake Buettner, at Blake_Buettner, Buettner, or just hit up Worn and Wound, at Worn and Wound. Check out our podcast. We've got clowns like Nick on all the time, and we're always just having great conversations. So, and it's not always just about watches. So don't feel like, you got to be a hardcore watch nerd to get in and enjoy it. And so check out the site and, engage with us as you want, and let us know, if Nick sent you. We'll give you a shout out. Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on. Make sure you guys, I'll put links in the description to Blake and to Worn and Wound. But thank you all for tuning in, rocking with us again for another episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace. Hey, everyone. This is Nick again. Before you take off, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Sneaker History Podcast. We just launched our new merch, including tees, stickers, keychains, and a bunch of other pieces you can grab to show your support for the podcast. You can purchase it now through our companion site, sittingtreasure.com. You can also get access to more episodes of the podcast by joining our Discord community at patreon.com/sneakerhistory. Plus, we've got a bunch of other fun things going on in the community, including trivia nights, giveaways, access to sneaker raffles from around the world, release announcements, and my favorite, just good people helping good people get the sneakers they want. Plus, we're not bought by advertisers, investors, or other big money. I'm confident in saying this is the best sneaker community I've ever been a part of. We've also teamed up with a few partners to offer our supporters discounts. You can find some in the links for this episode and even more in our Discord. Give us a try, and if you don't enjoy it, you can always cancel the membership at any time. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to be on the receiving end of someone showing appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey everyone, this is Nick again. Before you take off, do us a solid and head over to Apple Podcasts to leave us a review. Give us a rating on Spotify and Amazon Music, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel because we have even more video content coming soon. Speaking of new content, we have an amazing community of sneaker enthusiasts that hang out in our Sneaker History Discord on a daily basis. While sneakers is a connection point that brought us all together, we've all discovered countless shared passions that we have in common with each other. We recently launched a couple of new podcasts directly from our community. One of them is a Formula One podcast. If you're an F1 fan like me, the Exhaust Notes podcast is your weekly fix of Formula One fun. It's hosted by myself, Rohit Malhotra, and Todd Yates. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I've been wearing fitted hats for years and collecting my favorite teams since I was a little leaguer. It has been awesome to see so many new fans getting into fitteds in recent years. Crown and Stitch is our new talk show about fitted hats with Dexter, Keith, and myself, where we talk about fitted hats, snapbacks, throw in some obscure hats because we all kind of like some funky stuff once in a while, don't we? Copping, collecting, and so much more. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Hit the links in the show notes for this episode to give our new shows a listen, and be on the lookout for more new podcasts dropping soon. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.